Dear colleagues, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the International Online Conference, Orthodoxy and Contemporary Ecumenical Processes, Theological, Canonical and Geopolitical Aspects. On behalf of the International Council for the Defense of the Orthodox Canonical Order and the Center for Geostrategic Studies from Serbia, and in cooperation within the Italian publishing house Theosis Editrice and the Greek theological publication Orthodoxos Typos, I would like to thank all of our distinguished speakers, colleagues and guests for joining us today. Our conference brings together theologians, scholars, legal experts, journalists, and geopolitical analysts from different countries to examine some of the most important challenges facing orthodoxy in the contemporary world. The objective of this conference is, through an academic and expert approach, to contribute to better understanding of the complex relationship between theological issues, canonical order, and contemporary geopolitical processes, while providing a platform for informed and substantive discussion on the future of orthodoxy aimed at accelerating global changes. Today, developments affecting the Orthodox Church cannot always be examined exclusively from a theological perspective. Questions of ecclesiastical jurisdiction, autocephaly, canonical territory, primacy, and conciliarity increasingly intersect with questions of sovereignty, international relations, and geopolitical interest. At the same time, political considerations must not replace theological and canonical analysis. This is precisely why we have brought together specialists from different fields and different countries, so that we can approach these complex issues from several complementary perspectives. Each speaker will have approximately 10 minutes for their presentation. After all presentations, we will open the discussion, so I now declare the conference open. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Georgios Tramboulis from Greece, a Greek theologian and journalist and editor-in-chief of the weekly Orthodox publication, Orthodoxos Typos. His presentation takes us directly to one of the central questions of our conference, the contemporary role of the Phanar and the relationship between primacy and the preservation of Orthodoxy unity. His presentation is entitled The Phanar Between Primacy, Vanity and Orthodox Unity.
Beloved brothers, I greet you. Thank you for the invitation. The subject of the presentation will be the primacy of honor and the Patriarchate of Constantinople. I thank you in advance for your attention. The Acts of the Apostles informs us, concerning the life of the first Christians, that the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and one soul. Neither did anyone say that any of the things he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. This testimony of the Acts of the Apostles constitutes the measure and rule of the conciliar unity of the Church, and at the same time demonstrates that unity among the local Orthodox churches is not the product of discipline, agreement, or compromise, but is the communion of the Holy Spirit, whom our Lord bestowed upon his disciples on the day of Pentecost. The Church is Catholic, since she constitutes the one theanthropic organism, embracing within herself all things, those in heaven and those on earth, visible and invisible, uniting her members with one another throughout all the local churches, with Christ as her head. Her Catholicity is manifested even in her smallest part, in each individual act, in every event of her life. For this reason, the wise Father Justin Popovich, speaking of the Catholicity of the Church and of the fact that she is Catholic in every manifestation of her life, even in the simplest event within it, emphasizes that the Church of Christ is Catholic in each of her dioceses, that is, in each of her Orthodox Eucharistic communities, but also in each of her bishops and in every believer within her, in each of her cells. The unity of the Church is found in the communion of the Holy Spirit in the true faith, which is manifested as the bond of love and as the common mind of the body. This fact is, moreover, confirmed by the words of the Apostle Paul in the Epistle to the Ephesians, "One body and one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism." And while the Fathers of the Church emphasize that Catholicity is solemnly affirmed in each of her dioceses, in each of her bishops, in each of her faithful members, through the bond of faith, love, and oneness of mind, which, moreover, explains why the bishops are equal among themselves in the Orthodox Church, it may be observed that within the Patriarchate of Constantinople there is a deliberate cultivation of the position that its primate is the first in the Orthodox Church. Indeed, this new and unprecedented ecclesiological position of the Patriarchate of Constantinople is being continually developed, to the point that the Archbishop of America, regarded by many as a future patriarch, has asserted that the Patriarch of Constantinople, as ecumenical patriarch, is first without equal, primus sine paribus. This theological overemphasis by the Phanar on the first is intended to impose upon the Orthodox churches the conviction that he acts as the center of unity and as the visible head of the body of all the local Orthodox churches. In other words, the primate of the See of Constantinople is the first over the entire Orthodox Church, something analogous to what applies to the Pope of Rome in the Papal Church. Moreover, newly asserted, unfounded, and anti-canonical powers are attributed to the person of the first, powers that were established by no ecumenical council. This results in the attribution of special rights to that particular church, such as the right unilaterally to grant autocephaly or to receive appeals, that is, complaints lodged by persons belonging to other local churches. With regard to these powers, especially from the Council of Crete onwards, the Phanar has systematically cultivated the papal conception that whoever is not in communion with the first in the Orthodox Church thereby places himself outside the canonical order, that is, that his church is not a church in the fullness of the term. This conception of the Bishop of the Church of Constantinople, however, stands in complete contradiction to the teaching of the Church, according to which the canonical status and fullness of a local church derive from apostolic succession and the Orthodox confession of faith, and not from some privileged confirmation granted by the supposed first of orthodoxy. As has already been stated, the Orthodox Church is Catholic in each of her dioceses, in each of her bishops. It is evident that the more strongly the European Union becomes centralized by accelerating the process of its political integration into a federation of states, which are increasingly being transformed in substance into political units of a single supranational state, the more the Phanar is transformed into a Vatican, and its primate into a Pope of the East. Moreover, it attempts falsely to ground this transformation in the sacred canonical basis, particularly in Apostolic Canon 34, which establishes that a synod without its first is incomplete. Such an interpretation, however, can have no connection either with the canonical content of this apostolic canon or with the canonical tradition of the Church. For according to it, on the one hand, the first hierarch is inseparably linked to the specific synod of his own people, that is, of a particular local church. On the other hand, the concept of the first in the aforementioned canon simply denotes the one who presides over the synod, without any other special privileges or jurisdictions. Therefore, the interpretation given to it by the Phanar is entirely erroneous and devoid of theological meaning. Apostolic Canon 34 says nothing about a right of primacy, nor about any supposed right of the Patriarch of Constantinople to convene a synod and, in its name, to exercise authority over other bishops belonging to other local churches. Indeed, such is the audacity of those at the Phanar that they claim that the Patriarch did not assume these rights himself, nor did he demand them, but that they were granted to him by the ecumenical councils, and that anyone who disputes them thereby disputes the decisions of the God-bearing fathers. This is therefore something similar to what the Westerners asserted when they promoted a primacy of jurisdiction through the pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the pseudo-donation of Constantine, in order to impose their anti-canonical and unlawful claims upon the Church of Christ. It becomes clear that the coordinated actions of the Patriarch aimed at imposing himself upon the entire body of the Church, have, as their consequence, the disruption of her unity, provoking rivalry, disputes, and schisms, as has recently occurred in the case of the Patriarchate of Russia and the Ukrainian question.
Professor Vlasios Fidas writes the following concerning primacy. According to the interpretation of the East, primacy derived from the privileges of honor of the 5 patriarchal sees. This primacy was, on the one hand, a primacy of honor and not a primacy of jurisdiction. On the other hand, it concerned only the relationship of the first to the other patriarchs, and not the relationship of the first to the entire body of bishops of the Church, which is precisely what the Phanar is attempting to advance today. Likewise, the interpretation given by the Phanar to Canon 28 of the Fourth Ecumenical Council, according to which it supposedly expressly entrusted the Bishop of Constantinople with pastoral care for territories lying beyond the geographical boundaries of the other local autocephalous churches, is, to say the least, inappropriate. Professor Vasilios Giannopoulos, speaking of Canon 28 of the Fourth Ecumenical Council, upon which the Phanar relies in order to justify all manner of primacies of honor to which, allegedly, the See of Constantinople is entitled, observes that, according to the Council, the See of Rome owed its primacy of honor to the fact that Rome was the capital of the Roman state, and therefore the See of Constantinople likewise claimed equal privileges of honor with Rome. The jurisdiction recognized by the Council as belonging to the See of Constantinople was solely that of ordaining the metropolitans of Asia, Pontus, and Thrace, as well as only those bishops whose sees were among the barbarians. Accordingly, Canon 28 clearly defines the scope and substance of the jurisdiction of this see beyond Constantinople. Any other claim of the ecumenical see purporting to be based on Canon 28 is unfounded and anti-canonical. Moreover, the professor continues, today there is neither a Roman Empire nor any barbarians. Through the interpretation it gives to the term first, the Phanar seeks an entirely reshaped relationship with the Church as a whole, rather than a relationship concerning only the patriarchs and primates of the autocephalous churches who are equal to it. What is evident, therefore, is a departure from the perennial conciliar practice that ought to characterize the activity of the entire Orthodox Church. Through these newly introduced theories, the expression first has now become a title attributed exclusively to the person of the primate of the Church of Constantinople. At the same time, it employs the expressions mother of the churches and ecumenical in order to justify privileges and rights, even though everyone knows that only the Church of Jerusalem can be called the mother of the churches. The divine Nicodemus the Hagiorite, in the Pedalion, in his notes on Canon 28 of the Fourth Ecumenical Council, observes concerning the term ecumenical that neither the Patriarch of Constantinople, nor the Roman Patriarch, nor any other is ever called ecumenical, except Christ alone, who is truly the Patriarch of the whole inhabited world, to whom all authority in heaven and on earth has been given. Hence, the application of this same title gave rise to scandals between the Patriarch of Constantinople and the popes of Rome, I mean Pelagius and Gregory the Dialogist. For they, understanding the term ecumenical according to its primary meaning, called this title blasphemous, diabolical, and by many other names. And they said that whoever wishes to be called ecumenical is a forerunner of Antichrist, and in this they spoke the truth. The fact that the present Patriarch Bartholomew refuses to understand the teachings and counsels of holy men confirms that he has embarked upon the wrong path. Not the path of Christ, but the path of the adversary, that is, the devil. It is particularly tragic that an entire local church, the Church of Constantinople, which has brought forth a multitude of holy patriarchs, such as Gregory the Theologian, John Chrysostom, the great Photius, and so many others, should fall into such confusion as to attribute unprecedented rights and powers to the privileges of honor established by the Second Ecumenical Council. Saint Nicodemus the Hagiorite, interpreting this canon in the Pedalion, writes that the preposition meta here does not denote subordination or inferiority, as Zonaras incorrectly interprets it. For since Alexandria comes after Constantinople, Antioch after Alexandria, and Jerusalem after Antioch, There would then be 4 degrees of diminution in honor, and consequently 5 different degrees of honor, one higher than another, which is contrary to the entire Catholic Church and acceptable only to the Latins and the Latin-minded. Rather, it denotes equality of honor, together with an order of precedence, according to which one is first and another second. Saint Nicodemus's observation that the Latin-minded, like Patriarch Bartholomew, attribute rights and powers to privileges of honor confirms how greatly we ought to be concerned and vigilant with regard to the Phanar. The unity that every local church is obliged to serve is, in the case of the Phanar, literally being torpedoed precisely by its arrogant conduct, since, under the supposed guise of service, it promotes its own ambitions for power. This is a form of service whose underlying causes, moreover, are egoism, vainglory, and pride, which by their very nature are destructive of unity. These are the vices which, in the first instance, cast Lucifer and the angels who were of like mind with him out of communion with God. In the second, cast the Church of Rome out of the Church of Christ, and, in the present instance, are leading the Phanar, which willingly follows them, along the path exemplified by Rome. Church history shows that, after the conquest of Constantinople in 1453, Mehmed II granted the Patriarch of Constantinople religious and political privileges, making him the ethnarch, the millet pasha, of the Orthodox population of the Ottoman Empire. Unfortunately, however, in the 20th century, as the Orthodox ethos declined, particularly after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire and, somewhat later, following the enthronement of Athenagoras, there emerged a complete subordination of the Phanar to the West, both spiritually and politically, with particular emphasis on ecumenism. Thus today the Phanar, having replaced the Sultan with the President of the United States and become completely subordinated to American diplomacy, grants autocephaly to schismatics and to the unbaptized, self-ordained clergy of Metropolitan Epiphanius. It also plays a particular role in promoting globalization and Western values, having been spiritually and theologically profoundly altered by the heresy of ecumenism, which is itself truly the offspring of the ultra-liberal tendency within Protestantism. The patriarchal encyclical of 1848, however, which condemned every heresy and innovation in the Orthodox Church, emphasizes, when speaking of the people of God, that neither patriarchs nor councils have ever been able to introduce innovations, for the defender of the faith is the very body of the Church, that is, the people themselves, who desire that their faith remain forever unchanged and identical to the faith of their fathers. Just as many popes after the schism, as well as Latin-minded patriarchs, attempted this in practice, yet achieved nothing. The faithful people are called today as well to acquire the mind of the fathers, so that they may not become easy prey to the ecumenist storm. The people of God, having the right hand of the Lord as their guide and protector, must not be afraid of being stigmatized and must not, through their own fault, reach the point of remaining silent and submitting to the dictates of this world. The faithful people, the guardians of the Church of Christ, are called to understand that when Christ is being persecuted, as is happening today at the hands of the Phanar and its allies, all truly believing Christians have a responsibility to proclaim with boldness the truth of the undefiled faith and to speak freely and without restraint on every side. Thank you.
We are very grateful to Mr. Tramboulis for this presentation. And our next speaker is Professor Alexander Azadgan from the Southern California and American academic specializing in geopolitics, international political economy, and business studies. He is also senior political commentator on several global news channels, as well as editor-in-large and chief geopolitical counsel with Center for Geostrategic Studies. His presentation will turn our attention to the position of Orthodoxy in the United States and to the particular historical, religious, and political circumstances in which Orthodox Christianity has developed in America. His presentation is entitled Orthodoxy in America. Professor Azadgan, please feel free to begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dragana, for your invitation, and greetings from sunny Southern California, where it's 8:30 a.m. right now. I think it's 5 p.m. your time, 5:30. It's good to be with you, dear colleagues and friends and viewers, and especially my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. Before I present my paper, it's a very short paper. It got published by our think tank, Center for Geostrategic Studies, in March of this year. Before I present this short paper and answer your questions afterwards, I need to preface my lecture with a very important philosophical note. I need to emphatically state that I'm not promoting anyone's so-called propaganda. I'm guided by John 8:32, which states, "Truth shall set you free." Having said that, my presentation is based solely on my own personal opinions, so my assertions and presuppositions should not be misinterpreted as a statement of promoting on behalf of any person, any political cause, any organization, any foreign government, and/or any foreign country. I'm simply exercising my First Amendment right under the Constitution of the United States of America as a proud and patriotic American citizen, which is freedom of speech and freedom of thought. The title of my paper, Eastern Orthodox Christianity in the U.S., with the subtitle, History, Identity, and Contemporary Influence. So Eastern Orthodox Christianity here in the United States occupies a distinctive and evolving position within our nation's religious landscape. Rooted in diverse ethnic traditions, yet increasingly shaped by American cultural dynamics, Eastern Orthodoxy in the U.S. has undergone significant transformations since its arrival during the 18th and 19th centuries. In my paper, in this short paper, I explore the historical developments, structural complexity, cultural contributions, socio-political engagement, and contemporary challenges of the Orthodox Church here in United States. By examining both its internal dynamics and its relationship with broader American society, my research highlights how Orthodoxy functions as a religious, cultural, and social institution within a pluralistic, democratic context. The United States has long been characterized by religious pluralism, with Protestantism historically dominant, but numerous minority traditions maintaining an important presence. Among these, the Eastern Orthodox Church represents one of the oldest Christian traditions, though it remains relatively small compared to Catholic or Protestant denominations. Yet, despite its size, the Orthodox Church holds cultural, historical, and theological significance that far exceeds its numerical representation. Its presence in the U.S. provides a unique lens of understanding themes of immigration, ethnic identity, religious adaptation, and challenges of ecclesiastical unity in diverse societies such as the United States. Now, the first documented Eastern Orthodox presence in what later became U.S. territory occurred in the late 18th century when Russian missionaries arrived in Alaska, then part of the Russian Empire. They established missions, schools, and churches, and engaged in significant cultural exchange with indigenous populations such as the Aleuts and the Tlingit Native American tribes. The canonization of Saint Herman of Alaska symbolizes this early missionary heritage. The major expansion of Eastern Orthodoxy in the contiguous United States took place during the late 19th and early 20th century, driven by large waves of immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe, as well as West Asia, erroneously referred to as Middle East. The correct term is West Asia. Immigrants from Greece, Russia, Serbia, Syria, Lebanon, Romania, Bulgaria, and Ukraine founded parishes that founded as cultural as well as religious centers. These parishes often preserved native languages, customs, music, and communal traditions. Consequently, Eastern Orthodoxy in the U.S. developed among ethnic lines with multiple jurisdictions rather than a single unified national church. Over time, Orthodox communities faced the questions of how to maintain traditional practices while adapting to American sociocultural norms, values, and beliefs. The establishment of seminaries such as the Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology and Saint Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary helped foster American-born clergy and theologians. The autocephaly of the Orthodox Church in America, known as OCA, in 1970, represented an important step toward creating an American-based Orthodox identity, even as jurisdictional pluralism remains. In contrast to most nations where a single national Orthodox Church typically exists, the United States hosts numerous overlapping jurisdictions, which creates a lot of headaches, including the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, Orthodox Church in America, OCA, the Antiochian Orthodox Christian Archdiocese, Serbian, Romanian, Bulgarian, Georgian, and Albanian dioceses, and last but the greatest, the Russian Orthodox jurisdictions, including what we call the ROCOR, which stands for Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. While this fragmentation arose from immigration patterns and canonical ties to mother churches, it also presents challenges for unity and coordinated pastoral outreach. Formed in 2010, the Assembly of Bishops acts as a consultative body aimed at fostering cooperation among various jurisdictions. While it has made progress in areas such as chaplaincy and canonical recognition, it has not yet resolved the ongoing issue of jurisdictional unity. This is a problem we have here in the US. So Orthodox parishes have historically been centers of cultural preservation, offering language classes, festivals, community events, and social support. Over generations, however, many Orthodox Christians have become assimilated into mainstream American culture. As a result, the church has had to navigate the tensions between retaining ethnic heritage and appealing to converts and multi-ethnic families. Now, in the late 20th century and early 21st centuries, Eastern Orthodoxy in the US grew only through immigration, but also through conversion. Converts are often drawn to the church's liturgical tradition, continuity with other Christianity, with early Christianity and theological depth. And this shift has encouraged the development of more pan-Orthodox practices and English language liturgy. Historically, the Eastern Orthodox Church is less overtly political in the US compared to some Protestant denominations. Today, because of all the confusion out there, the sanctity of life, which is the abortion issue, and religious liberty align with certain broader discussions in American public life. Now, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese and other jurisdictions participate in interfaith dialogues, humanitarian efforts, and advocacy on issues such as international religious freedom, especially concerning the Ecumenical Patriarchate and Orthodox communities in West Asia region, known as Middle East also. Eastern Orthodox leaders have also engaged in domestic humanitarian efforts through organizations like International Orthodox Christian Charities, IOCC, emphasizing charitable work over political activism. The multiplicity of jurisdictions poses ongoing canonical and administrative challenges, like I said earlier. While many American Orthodox Christians desire a unified national church, historical, cultural, and geopolitical factors complicate this process. Eastern Orthodox communities face the same demographic issues as many other religious groups in the US, which is declining birth rates, reduced participation among younger generations, and the need to engage effectively with American society while preserving traditional liturgical and theological identity. Eastern Orthodoxy, in my opinion, in the US must navigate tensions between traditional stances on moral teachings and the pluralistic, individualistic ethos of our American culture. At the same time, issues of transgender terrorism, I especially call it that. It is a form of terrorism, psychological terrorism, hyper-technology, and social justice challenges the church to articulate strong traditional responses, especially within the seemingly wayward Greek Orthodox archdiocese, grounded in its theological traditions while addressing contemporary concerns without becoming wokeist liberals. I don't know if you're familiar with this term. We can talk about it later, like some mainstream Protestant denominations that have gone off the rail and into the leftist deep end. In conclusion, Eastern Orthodox Church here in the United States represents a complex and evolving institution shaped by immigration, cultural identity, theological tradition, and adaptation to American society. Though numerically small, Eastern Orthodoxy plays a significant role in the religious mosaic of our country, United States. Its contributions to cultural diversity, traditional spiritual life, and community cohesion are substantial. And its ongoing development raises important questions about unity, identity, and the future of minority religious traditions in a pluralistic world. As the Eastern Orthodox Church continues to adapt to the shifting religious and cultural dynamics of the 21st century, its role in the United States will be defined both by its ancient heritage and its capacity for renewal within the American context. Thank you so much for listening to me. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Azadgan, for your great speech. It was very interesting to hear from you. I will now continue our discussion by addressing one of the central questions in contemporary inter-Orthodox relations, the distinction between the traditional primacy of honor and claims to broader jurisdictional authority within the Orthodox Church. My presentation is entitled Between the Primacy of Honor and Primacy of Authority, the Role of Phanar in Contemporary Divisions within the Orthodox Church. This question is not merely a terminological debate among theologians. It concerns the very nature of conciliarity of the Orthodox Church and the relationship among the local autocephaly churches and today, unfortunately, increasingly geopolitics as well. Orthodox tradition has always recognized the primacy of honor. Since ancient times, the Patriarch of Constantinople has borne the title first among equal. In the canonical tradition of the Church, this title has never implied the universal jurisdiction of a single bishop over the entire Orthodox Church, modelated on the Roman Catholic papal system. Quite the contrary, conciliarity rather than the centralized authority of one man constitutes the foundation of Orthodox ecclesiology. What we have been witnessing in recent decades is an attempt to transform this historical primacy of honor into something fundamentally different, into a form of actual authority, a right to interfere in the internal affairs of other local churches, and the right to decide unilaterally on matters of autocephaly, canonical territory, and ecclesiastical jurisdiction throughout the world. This process did not begin yesterday. Its roots go back to the 1920 and the activities of Patriarch Metaxakis, who in 1922 issued a Tomos by which Constantinople claimed for itself the right of direct supervision and governments over all Orthodox parishes outside the boundaries of the local churches in Europe, America, and elsewhere. That act, adopted immediately after the revolution in Russia, had an unmistakable objective to exploit the weakness of the Russian Orthodox Church in order to expand Constantinople's influence at its expense. Patriarch Bartolome continues precisely along this line. His involvement in the creation of the non-canonical Orthodox Church of Ukraine in 2090 through the unification of schismatic structures and the granting of tomos of autocephaly outside the canonical order represents a direct continuation of Metaxaxis' project, attempt to transform the historical primacy of honor into a practical instrument for reshaping the entire Orthodox map of the world. Here we come to a question that many in the West avoid asking openly. Why does the Patriarch of Constantinople, whose flock today consists of only a few scattered parishes around the world, display such aggressive ambitions toward territories and communities that historically and canonically do not belong to his jurisdiction? The answer, unfortunately, lies to a large extent outside theology. For decades, the Patriarchate of Constantinople was maintained close ties with U.S. State Department and intelligence structures. These ties are no secret. They have also been written about in the American press, including the Michael Warren's article in the American Conservative entitled "The CIA Man in Constantinople," which documents in details decades of cooperation between the U.S. intelligence community and the Phanar. It is precisely this support, political, diplomatic, and financial, that enables Constantinople, despite its own demographic and institutional weakness, to continue acting as though it possesses universal jurisdiction. In other words, what is lacking in canonical and ecclesiological legitimacy is compensated for by the geopolitical support of external center of powers, for which a weakened and divided Orthodoxy, and in particular weakened Russian Orthodox Church, is strategic objective rather than an accidental consequences. These consequences of such actions go far beyond academic debate. We see them in the persecution of the clergy and faithful of the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, in the seizure of monasteries and churches, and in arrest of hierarchies, and all of this with the tacit or open support of the very same Western structures that otherwise publicly proclaim their commitment to religious freedoms. That is why today we face a series of questions to which we can no longer respond with silence. Can the primacy of honor, established through centuries of conciliar tradition, legitimately be transformed into a right to decide unilaterally on the fate of local churches without their consent? If the Patriarchate of Constantinople today numbers fewer faithful than an average diocese in Russia or Serbia, from where does it derive the authority to grant or revoke autocephaly? Is it possible for someone to be a spiritual authority and at the same time a diplomatic instrument of a great power, without this compromising the integrity of his spiritual mission itself? And finally, if we remain silent about this instrumentalization of faith today, who can guarantee that tomorrow another local church, including the smallest, will not become the next target of the same mechanism? That is why I believe it is essential that this discussion between the primacy of honor and the primacy of authority remain at the center of our discussion today. For the defense of the canonical order is not merely the defense of tradition for traditional sake, it is defense of the very way in which the Orthodox Church understands itself as a community of equal local churches united by faith and conciliarity rather than by hierarchy subordinate to external interests. Thank you very much for your attention. I will try now to show you one short video about the consequences of the actions of the Phanar in the Ukraine. Thank you very much. We will now continue with Georgios Karalis from Greece, a specialist in Greek patristic. Mr. Karalis studied under the distinguished Orthodox theologian John Romanides and served as director of Italia Ortodossa. He has published articles in Orthodoxos Typos, lectured at Orthodoxos parishes and Metexis Association, and he is the author of several books of Orthodox theology. His presentation will take us more deeply in the theological and ecclesiological dimensions of today's discussion, and the presentation is entitled From the Historical Context of Ecumenism to the Theological Distortion of Ecclesiology.
Dear fathers and brothers, every historical and ecclesial phenomenon, when it enters the life of the Church, also requires a theological language through which it may be legitimized. Ecumenism, therefore, did not content itself with establishing organizations, conferences, and dialogues. It required a new theology, a new ecclesiology, and a new understanding of unity, personhood, communion, and primacy. It is precisely here that the St. Sergius Institute in Paris assumes particular significance. The criticism is directed against the historical and theological role of this particular institute, as a setting in which tendencies consonant with Western personalism and ecumenical dialogue were developed. Patristic theology proceeds from an entirely different foundation. The Fathers do not theologize as philosophers, but as those who have been deified. They do not construct an ontology by means of abstract concepts, but speak from the experience of purification, illumination, and deification. Consequently, the first and fundamental distinction is not between the individual and the person, nor between relation and otherness, but between the created and the uncreated. God alone is uncreated. Everything that exists apart from him is created. Human beings, angels, and the visible and invisible world. Man does not derive from the essence of God, for he is not consubstantial with God. He comes into being through God's creative energy. The Son and the Holy Spirit, by contrast, have their origin from the Father according to nature. The Son is begotten, while the Spirit proceeds. For this reason, the Son and the Spirit are consubstantial with the Father. From this distinction also follows the manner in which the Fathers speak of God. The essence of God is imparticipable, unknowable, and inaccessible. Man cannot know God either through philosophical analogy or through intellectual reasoning. He knows God only through participation in his uncreated energies. Theology, therefore, is not an intellectual construction, but the fruit of participation in the uncreated life of God. Here we must recall a simple but decisive patristic distinction. Nature answers the question of what someone is. Hypostasis answers the question of who someone is. Energy indicates how one acts. If these three are confused, theology collapses. In the Holy Trinity, there is one nature, one energy, one will, one goodness, one love, and one freedom. The three hypostases are distinguished not because they possess three different wills or three different freedoms, but because they possess incommunicable hypostatic properties. The Father is unbegotten, the Son is begotten of the Father, and the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. These hypostatic properties are not communicated. All natural properties, however, glory, goodness, will, energy, love, are common to all three persons. Here we find a patristic rule that contemporary theology often forgets. Everything said of the Holy Trinity is either common to all three persons, or belongs to one person alone as a hypostatic property. If we attribute to a person what begins to nature, we destroy the unity of the Godhead. If we attribute to nature what belongs to hypostasis, we confuse the persons. Heresies arise from such confusions. The theology of personalism, as expressed particularly by Zizioulas, shifts the center of emphasis from nature and energy to person and relation. It holds that nature, if made the basis of unity, leads to necessity. It therefore presents the person as the source of freedom, and the Father as the first, who in freedom and love hypostasises the divine essence by begetting the Son and causing the Spirit to proceed. Yet it is precisely here that the theological problem arises. If freedom and love belong to the person of the Father as personal attributes, then they are no longer common natural energies of the Holy Trinity. And if they are not common, what then happens to the Son and the Spirit? Do they too possess another freedom and another love? In that case, three freedoms, three loves, and three energies are introduced. Or do they perhaps participate in the freedom and love of the Father? In that case, subordination is introduced rather than consubstantiality. In either case, what the Fathers attribute to nature is transferred to the person. And when this occurs in Trinitarian theology, it does not remain without consequences. It passes immediately into ecclesiology. If the unity of the Holy Trinity is no longer grounded in a common nature, common energy, and common will, but in a communion of persons around one who is first, then the Church will likewise be interpreted in the same way, as a communion of persons around one who is first. Thus arises the Eucharistic ecclesiology of primacy. According to this understanding, the Church is not understood first and foremost as the body of Christ, in which the truth of the faith is lived and man is healed, purified, illumined, and deified. Rather, it is understood as a Eucharistic community, as an assembly gathered around the bishop, who functions as the visible center of unity. When several bishops concelebrate, one who is first is again required. At the local level, the first is the bishop. At the regional level, the metropolitan or president of the synod. At the universal level, the ecumenical patriarch. And, in the event of union with Rome, the pope. In this way, the theology of primacy acquires an ostensibly Trinitarian foundation. Just as, supposedly, unity exists in the Holy Trinity because there is one who is first, namely the Father, so too unity exists in the Church only when there is one who is first. This analogy, however, is contrary to the Fathers. The Fathers do not teach that the unity of the Trinity derives from a personal principle that replaces nature. They teach that God is one because there is one divine nature, one energy, one will, one goodness, and one glory. The Father is the cause of the Son and the Spirit with regard to their mode of existence, not the cause of the divine essence, nor the source of some personal freedom that precedes nature. The Eucharistic ecclesiology of primacy therefore distorts the logic of the Fathers, because it transfers into the Church an erroneous Trinitarian theology. Unity ceases to be the unity of faith, right confession, the life of healing, and participation in the uncreated energies of God. It becomes a unity of relation, communion, and subordination to one who is first. Faith recedes into the background. What is decisive is no longer Orthodox confession, but the fact of communion. This explains why this particular ecclesiology can be employed ecumenistically. If the Church is defined above all as a communion around one who is first, then dogmatic differences can be regarded as secondary. The problem is no longer heresy, but the absence of communion. And the solution is not a return to the true faith, but the restoration of communion through primacy. The problem, therefore, is not merely that ecumenism promotes dialogue with heretics. The deeper problem is that it introduces a different logic into ecclesiology itself. The Church no longer appears as the one Church that preserves the truth, but as a Eucharistic communion that requires one who is first in order to express its unity. This is the point at which the distortion becomes dogmatic. The patristic response is clear. The Church is not a communion of persons independently of faith. She is the body of Christ, in which man is healed, illumined, and deified. The unity of the Church is not produced by a single bishop who is first, but by Christ, the true faith, common participation in the uncreated energies, and the Eucharistic life as the fruit of right confession. The Eucharist cannot be separated from faith. There is no true Eucharistic communion without Orthodox confession. If the patristic distinction between nature, hypostasis, and energy is lost, then the proper understanding of the Church is also lost. If communion is transferred from nature and energies to persons understood as relations, then unity becomes relational rather than dogmatic. If primacy is regarded as a necessary principle of unity, then Christ in practice ceases to be the head who constitutes the Church in the truth. My dear brothers, the Church is one not because she possesses an earthly bearer of universal unity, but because she is the body of the one Christ, lives by the one Spirit, and confesses one faith. Without the faith of the Fathers, no Eucharistic assembly, no communion, and no primacy can express the true unity of the Church. For this reason, the Orthodox faithful, pastors, and theologians today are called to preserve not only the outward boundaries of the Church, but also the logic of the Fathers. The Church has one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one uncreated grace, one divine life, and one truth, Christ. Thank you.
We're very thankful to Mr. Karalis for his presentation. And our next speaker is Nicolò Ghigi from Italy, a PhD candidate in Ancient Studies at Ca' Foscari University of Venice, specializing in Byzantine philology. He also pursued theology studies at the Moscow Theological Academy, and his presentation is entitled The Subjection of the Church to Political Expediencies as a Motive for Ecumenism. Mr. Ghigi, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Esteemed colleagues, the present conference in which I have the honor of participating highlights the dark connections between the attempts to undermine orthodoxy from within through the pan-heresy of ecumenism and the strategic interests of certain global powers in the eradication of what they themselves regard as merely a geopolitical space, namely the Orthodox space. The relationship between ecumenism and political interest, to speak frankly, has accompanied this heresy from its birth. Even before the birth of what is properly called ecumenism, we can observe that political power was often ready to relinquish the Orthodox faith in the name of a strategic interest. In order to understand the few examples I intended to present you, it is necessary to make a preliminary distinction. We must indeed distinguish at least three kinds of ecumenism, which, although they cooperate and often are mixed with one another, they are the product of different ideologies and they pursue different goals. The first is the so-called historical ecumenism, that is, that kind which was practiced before the emergence of the properly called ecumenism as an ideology and theology in the 20th century. It concerns dialogue between Christian confessions aimed at seeking agreements chiefly used for confronting common enemies. We can mention some cases that directly concern the Orthodox Church, such as the attempt at dialogue with the Calvinists under Patriarch Cyril Lucaris for anti-Latin purposes, clearly. Those with the Anglicans non-jurors, conducted firstly by the Patriarchate of Jerusalem and then by the Russian Church at the end of the 17th century, and the attempts to unite the Russian Church with the Old Catholics in 1875, always with the aim of opposing the papacy. None of these dialogues actually produced any result, and the same manner in which they were conducted was radically different from modern ecumenism, since they involved strict theological discussions and allowed no ambiguity. In general, the heretics were also asked to sign an Orthodox confession of faith, as is the case of the proposals of the remnants of the British Church that were sent to Jerusalem by the non-jurors bishops. For this reason, modern ecumenists, although they regard these discussions as precursors of their own practice and ideology, and in my opinion, they are not entirely justified, nevertheless, they often condemn the narrowness and spiritual obtuseness of the participants, because their mentality was so different from the one of contemporary ecumenists. The second kind is the Protestant origin ecumenism, which was conceived in circles connected with Freemasonry within the progress of the American Methodism at the beginning of the last century. This ecumenism begins with the so-called branch theory, according to which no Christian community already constitutes the fullness of the Church of Christ, but rather the Church is like a tree, of which each branch, that is, each church or heresy, is an integral part. A fundamental premise of this heresy is that the Church of Christ today does not exist as an organized and visible form, but in an invisible form, which must become visible through cooperation among the various Christian confessions until unity is achieved. This form of ecumenism is totally relativistic and derives specifically from the ecclesiology of the radical reformers. But nevertheless, it constitutes the basis of the World Council of Churches and of most worldwide ecumenical organizations. In this ecumenism, the various local Orthodox churches, unfortunately, have participated all to some extent, since they have joined the aforementioned organizations, and even though in the words they reject the branch theory and claim that they participate in these bodies only to present the Orthodox position, in practice, however, they join as full members of those bodies that openly reject evangelical teaching and Orthodox ecclesiology. The third kind, finally, is the Roman Catholic ecumenism, which was born after the Second Vatican Council. It begins from premises very different from those of Protestant ecumenism, which is still rejected by the Latin Church de facto. Although Roman Catholic ecumenism has entered into close cooperation with the Protestant ecumenism. The Latin Church, indeed, regards itself as the true visible church, but recognizes a certain form of ecclesiality in bodies that have separated from it. The Pope of Rome, in this sense, is not merely the head of the Catholic Church, of the Latin Church, but of all Christians in the world, even of those who do not recognize his authority. This teaching has been part of the Latin understanding of primacy for many centuries, and we can see some practical applications as early as the Council of Florence in 1439, where the seats inside the cathedral in which the discussions had to take place were arranged so that the Pope sat in the center between the Roman and the Greek delegation as the father and head of both, and not merely as the head of a Latin delegation. And this is naturally provoked protests from the Orthodox. But the same occurs today, as when ecumenical meetings are held in the Vatican, and the Pope sits in a separate and elevated position apart from the representatives of the other Christian confessions we are present. Historically, the Latin Church also always regarded the recognition of papal authority and consequently of the correctness of the Pope's teaching as the first element in the unification of group that had separated from it, without, however, always requiring the adoption of their customs, rites, or even of the Latin Creed, but allowing them to retain their own according to the well-known Jesuit expression, unity in faith and diversity in rites. This is the famous phenomenon of unitism. In this sense, the new Roman Catholic ecumenism is nothing other than a continuation of unitism by other means and other tones, clearly more conciliatory and peaceful than in the past. It is perhaps no coincidence that the clergy and the organs of the Catholic propaganda, which in the decades before the Council had been devoted to bringing other Christians back to Rome, they became the same organs for spreading ecumenism, in fact pursuing the same goal by different methods. The local Orthodox churches, unfortunately, have exposed themselves fully to this kind of ecumenism, since all of them maintain close ecumenical contacts with the Pope of Rome, much stronger than their former relations with the World Council of Churches and Protestant communities. In some cases, such as in Russia, due to the influence of Metropolitan Nicodemus Rotov, they even went as far as proposing a sacrament intercommunion with the Roman Church, which was enhanced but fortunately withdrawn as soon as it became possible. It is precisely from this last case, the case of Metropolitan Nicodemus, that I would like to begin my analysis of the relationship between ecumenism and politics. The reason why Nicodemus, the so-called Red Metropolitan, because of his absolute loyalty to the communist authorities, opened the new ecumenical course of the Moscow Patriarchate during the Khrushchev and Brezhnev era is not a secret. It was a clear directive from the Central Committee of the Communist Party, which wanted to use the Church as an instrument of foreign propaganda in its attempt to open itself to the world through the so-called de-Stalinization. Ecumenism with Rome, entering into the World Council of Churches, even the Common Chalice and many other alterations of the faith were thus introduced into the Patriarchate as a consequence of a specific desire of the political authorities, upon which it was fully dependent after the persecutions of the preceding decades and the re-establishment of the Patriarchate in 1943. But the same thing happened with the Patriarchate of Constantinople, which was subject to the West. The ecumenical activities of Constantinople Patriarchate began in 1920 with dialogues with the Anglicans. And we must remember that as early as the Crimean War, when the Patriarchate compelled its clergy to pray for the victory of the Sultan and not of that of the Orthodox Russian army, yet from the Crimean War, the British embassy served as the legal protector of the Church of Constantinople, especially during the years of the decline of the Ottoman Empire. And so the Patriarchate continued to participate ever more actively in this framework, in this political framework, and to work on the front line for the alteration of Orthodox theology and ecclesiology, obeying the religious directives of the American-dominated Western geopolitical sphere. And it continues to do so to this day on the well-known issues of we have spoken before. But if we set apart these cases from the general apostatic world of our days and we look to earlier periods when ecumenism was still called unitism, we find that in all cases the submissions of the unites to Rome has purely political motives, whether it concerned the desire of the Western Ruthenian nobles to become independent from Muscovy, the desire of Emperor John VIII to obtain military assistance against the Turkish siege, or that of Michael VIII to pacify the situation of the divided empire after the Frankish occupation. In all these cases, there were desires for political success placed above the purity of the faith, concessions to an acceptable compromise on dogmatic matters for the purpose of obtaining some worldly benefit. And this in my opinion, is the true meaning of the heresy of Sergianism, an heresy which to this day has not yet been precisely defined, but which in my view is not to be strictly tied to any specific historical political context, but rather it generally denotes the subjugation of the Church to the dictates and interests of any power not established by God. And we know from the Holy Confessors that even the godly anointed imperial power, so each power which opposes to divine law can become a not established by God power. So we see that this principle was enhanced in the opposition to the above-mentioned attempts at union during the Byzantine times. And those who opposed these unions were certainly not enemies of political authority as per se, nor did they hate their own land or refuse to help it. From the writings of Saint Mark of Ephesus, for example, his anguish over the fate of the city of Constantinople is perfectly clear. Nevertheless, he makes it clear from the outset that if a union can help the city, it must be a union founded on truth, and not on compromise and falsehood. Historically, the path of resistance to uniatheism and ecumenism was by no means an easy one, but a martyric and confessional path, which led to countless sufferings, exils, mutilations. Let us think of the cases of the confessing monk Meletian and Galactian, who proclaimed the Unite Imperator Michael to be a heretic and deposed, and even to the supreme martyrdom of the Athonite monks of the Protaton and the Zographum monastery, who refused to yield to the pressure of the Latin-minded. Nevertheless, this is the royal road, the royal path toward restoring the fundamental evangelical principle of seek first the kingdom of God and render unto God the things that are God's. That is, this is the right and undefiled confession of faith, which aims to prevent anyone from being carried away from the steerings of the faith by such worldly delusions as every political success which has no connection with the Orthodox faith. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gigi, for your presentation. Great speech. Now we have a next speaker, our dear Olimpia Franzoni from Italy, publisher and editor-in-chief of Theosis Editrice, an Italian publishing house specializing in Orthodox theology, whose work is firmly grounded in the teaching of the Holy Fathers. Her presentation addresses the theological consequences of ecumenism and more specifically the introduction of concepts originating in Latin theological traditions into Orthodox theology. Her presentation is entitled Contamination from Ecumenism, the Latin Free Will in Orthodox Theology. Ms. Franzoni, please proceed.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you, everyone that is listening, and Dragana, of course, for this opportunity. Within ecumenical dialogue, in an attempt to make Orthodox theology comprehensible to the West, there has often been a tendency to adopt Western terminology. The reason then is that Western categories are no longer judged in the light of the Fathers, but rather that the Fathers are read through a conceptual framework different from their own. This becomes particularly clear in the translation and interpretations of St. Maximus the Confessor. Distinct terms such as gnome, crisis, proeresis, and autoexousion are sometimes drawn into the Western semantic field of free will. Already at the end of the 1980s, Joseph V. Farrell, in his study Free Choice in St. Maximus the Confessor, drew attention to the need not to turn proeresis into an autonomous faculty of the person. Farrell, in fact, distinguished the power to choose, which belongs to nature, from the concrete mode in which that power is exercised. The subject, however, has remained a little known, thereby creating dangers also for the spiritual life, because every change in theology has consequences for the way in which we live in the ascetic life. If we regard the liberation wavering, and choice between opposites as expression of the perfection of human freedom rather than as characteristics of the fallen condition, we end up concentrating our attention only on the outward results of our actions. We adopt a legalistic mentality in which asceticism is reduced to a simple effort not to harm ourselves or others. The ascetic life taught to us by the fathers is instead, first and foremost, an ever fuller entrustment of ourselves to God, so that our nous may be purified and we may return to moving according to nature toward the good. As an Italian publisher, therefore, I'm pleased to have brought to attention of Orthodox Christians in my country the book Foundations by Georgios Karalis, in which the subject is examined in depth. And I would also like to contribute to making it better known among our Orthodox brothers and sisters abroad. In St. Maximus the Confessor, the term proeresis is used homonymously. The same term can indicate three different realities. In man before the fall, it indicates the personal possibility of freely adhering to the natural movement toward God. In fallen man, it indicates the choice that follows deliberation. In Christ, it indicates by appropriation the natural human will assumed by the Logos. A strand of Western theology, which has also influenced many Orthodox theologians, has identified proeresis with free will, understood as an autonomous power of the person. For this reason, the term is often rendered as free will, in a misleading way, since none of these three meanings in St. Maximus coincides with this concept. This identification leads either to attributing to the person what belongs to nature or to introducing into Christ a deliberative dynamic that St. Maximus excludes. For St. Maximus, as for the other fathers of the Church, will, freedom, and operative capacity belongs to nature. The person does not possess a faculty of willing of his own, distinct from that common to human nature. What is personal, rather, is the mode in which this natural faculty is exercised. Before the fall, man's natural movement was directed toward God. There was no need to deliberate between opposing possibilities. By following his own natural will, man would also have followed the divine will. Adam, however, had not yet been established in the uncreated grace of God in such a way that his proeresis had become immutable. The fall consists in a deviation in the mode of actualizing the natural will. The person appropriates the common natural movement and can exercise it according to a mode contrary to the logos of nature. With the fall, the condition of human nature becomes marked by possibility, pain, and death. The economic will is the deliberative mode in which fallen men exercise the natural will, because the good is no longer apprehended immediately. Man therefore passes through the process of gnome, investigates, thinks, deliberates, and judges what appears possible to him. Proeresis is not the gnomic will. Proeresis is the act of choice that follows judgment. Choice is then followed by impulse and execution. Let us take an example. A man may use his knowledge of the laws of physics to strike another man with a cannonball. The natural capacity to know remains the same. It is the self-interest use of that capacity, the mode in which it is exercised, that stands opposed to the logos of nature. In the return to God, this dynamic progressively diminishes. St. Maximus states that reflection, judgment, and choice concern doubtful realities. When all ambiguity disappears and the truth is manifested, choice between opposites also disappears, without man thereby ceasing to be rational. What remains is an operative intellectual appetite according to nature, directed toward that which is desirable by nature. The diminishing of deliberation, which takes place progressively in the saints as they return to God, is presented in Christ from the very beginning as an original perfection. The human will, assumed by the Logos, moves naturally toward the good, in fully conformity with the divine will, and knows no wavering. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fronzoni. We will now move from theological and canonical dimension toward the field of international law. Our next speaker is Arnaud Develay from France, a specialist in international humanitarian law, and his presentation raises an important analytic question whether concepts and principles developed within the international law can provide a useful framework for understanding contemporary disputes concerning ecclesiastical jurisdiction, and his presentation is entitled The Principle of Non-Interference and Ecclesiastical Jurisdiction. Can international law provide a useful analytic framework? Mr. Develay, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Dragana, and hello to everyone. I'm very honored to participate in this forum. Obviously, the ecclesiastical law is something quite unknown to me, but I had to delve into it. And I must admit that international law, secular law, actually delves pretty neatly with what is referred as canonical law. In the sense that on the main thematics such as territorial sovereignty, jurisdictional boundaries, and the principle of non-interference, albeit with some major differences, which I will touch on later on, both systems are actually quite congruent. If we look, for instance, at the concept of sovereignty versus autocephaly, we can have on one side in international law the concept of Westphalian sovereignty, a model which establishes that states are legally equal and have exclusive authority within their borders, whereas in canon law, autocephaly functions similarly, an autocephalous church being itself entirely self-governing, legally equal to all patriarchates, and free from external ecclesiastical dictation. On the concept of integrity, territorial integrity in international law sees territorial borders of a state to be strictly protected against any kind of revision. And likewise, canon law uses the principle of canonical territory to assert that a specific patriarchate has an absolute monopoly over the spiritual administration within a defined geographic space. On the issue of independence, or autocephaly sua generis, one would say, the concept of statehood as described in the Montevideo Convention calls for four criteria. One is defined territory, two, permanent population, an effective government, and four, capacity to enter relations with other states. The whole set of criteria being, of course, amplified through the process of recognition by other states. Likewise, in canonical law, autocephaly requires clear geographic boundaries, usually matching that of a secular nation state, a distinct flock of faithful and a sufficient number of local bishops, usually at least 3 to form a holy synod, a functioning administrative synod led by a primat, patriarch, archbishop, or metropolitan, and finally the ability to interact with, enter into communion with, and or be recognized by other independent churches. Where the situation somewhat tends to differ and diverge is on the concept of non-interference and territorial integrity. While on the surface of things, such text, such as the UN Charter, Article 2, Paragraph 7, states that nothing contained in the present charter shall authorize the UN to intervene in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state. Canon 2 of the Second Ecumenical Council, Constantinople I, 381 AD, states that bishops are not to go beyond their dioceses to churches lying outside of their bounds, nor bring confusion on the churches. Let the bishop of Alexandria govern the affairs of Egypt only, and let the bishops of the East govern the East alone. Likewise, on issues of prohibition of territorial encroachment, UN Article 2, Paragraph 4 states that all members of the UN shall refrain in their international relation from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Whereas Canon 35 of the Apostolic Canons, 4th century, states that let not a bishop dare to ordain beyond his own limits in cities and places not subject to him. If he be convicted of doing so, let both him and those whom he has ordained be deposed. The rationale behind those texts, those general law texts, is the preservation of historical border. Whereas customary international law holds that administrative boundaries should be respected and maintained upon the acquisition of independence or sovereignty, Canon 8 of the Third Ecumenical Council, Ephesus 431 AD, states that none of the bishops shall take unto himself a province which has not, from the first and from the beginning, been under his hand or that of his predecessors, lest the canons of the fathers be transgressed, or the arrogance of secular power be introduced under the pretext of the priesthood. The problem begins when we look at the so-called legal exception, which in secular law we call intervention under humanitarian pretense, versus what is referred to in canonical law as appellate power. The secular mechanism, also known as UN Charter Article 42, under Chapter 7, states that the UN Security Council may take action by air, sea, or land forces as may be necessary to maintain or restore international peace and security, the legal exception to non-interference. I would add that Article 51, self-defense and or defense of others, also applies, and it actually is something that will be quite relevant to the issue that brings us somewhat all together to discuss today. Likewise, I was mentioning, so the exception, the legal exception in canonical mechanism, i.e. Canon 19 and 17 of the Fourth Ecumenical Council, the famous Chalcedon, 451 AD. And if a bishop or clergyman have a difference with the metropolitan of the province, let him have recourse to the exarchs or the diocese, or to the throne of the imperial city of Constantinople, and there let it be tried. Obviously, under the UN Charter, non-interference is suspended if the Security Council unanimously and without any veto deems that the situation constitutes a threat to international peace, then intervention may be warranted. In Orthodox canon law, Constantinople uses canons 9 and 17 of Chalcedon as its own Chapter 7. It argues that these canons granted an exclusive appellate authority, also known as ekleton, to cross into another patriarchate's territory to resolve a crisis, lift an excommunication, or heal a schism. This brings us to the situation ongoing in Ukraine, when basically the intent of the Metropolitan Bartholomew seems to be not to heal a schism, but to promote one, as Dragana you've shown in your footage earlier. So in that sense, it's something that Moscow calls an illegal secessionist movement. The argument that Moscow relies on, and as far as the Ukrainian realm, spiritual realm, is that of a 1686 synodal letter issued by the Ecumenical Patriarch Dionysius IV, which transferred the Metropolitan See of Kiev under the administration of the Patriarchate of Moscow. Moscow interprets this 17th century document as a permanent, irreversible transfer of sovereign territory, spiritual territory. From this viewpoint, the Ukrainian Church was an integral part of Moscow's canonical territory. Therefore, any attempt by Kiev to establish an independent church without Moscow's explicit permission is viewed exactly like an illegal declaration of independence. As such, Constantinople is perceived as an external aggressor supporting rebellion. For when a state faces a secessionist movement, it fiercely condemns any foreign powers that provides diplomatic recognition or material support to the rebels, viewing it as a violation of the principle of non-interference. Moscow furthermore argues that the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople has no global jurisdiction to unilaterally redraw borders or lift canonical penalties that Moscow imposed on Ukrainian churches leaders. And by issuing the Tobos of autocephaly in 2019, Constantinople did not just recognize a new church in Moscow's eyes, it actively intervened in what was an internal domestic dispute. Moscow views Constantinople's action as an act of geopolitical and ecclesiastical aggression, accusing it of legitimizing schismatics and providing external sponsorship to an illegal rebellion inside Moscow's own sovereign spiritual borders. The result is the severance of diplomatic relations, as Moscow Patriarch broke off Eucharistic communion with Constantinople in 2018. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Develay. As we can see, we can find a very similar acting of Western powers, no matter we speak about international relations, spiritual relations, military actions. We can see just the same pattern of ignoring agreements and acting how they think that it's necessary to act. Thank you very much once again. Our next... Yes, please.
Yes, I wanted to add that there is actually a lawsuit going on in Turkey right now against the Phanar, basically bearing on its self-acquired authority to act as you mentioned earlier, the primacy of authority as opposed to primacy of honor, which is contrary to the text contained in the Lausanne Treaty 1923 and goes against the constitutional order of the Turkish Republic. So we shall see what transpires out of that case, but it's an important case to follow.
Yes, I agree totally. I'm also following this case, and we will see, because yes, he's doing everything against international law and canonical order as well. Thank you very much once again, Mr. Develay. Our next speaker is Konrad Rikas from Poland, geopolitical analyst and journalist. His presentation places contemporary processes within a broader historical context and examines the relationship between Uniatism, Ecumenism, and Western strategies toward the Orthodox world. By considering historical patterns alongside contemporary developments, his presentation raises the question of whether some of the processes we are witnessing today represent entirely new phenomena, or rather the new manifestation of much older strategies. His presentation is entitled Uniatism, Ecumenism, Hostile Takeover, Western Strategies Against Orthodoxy in Historical Context. Mr. Rikas, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to have a word on this conference and to speak among so magnificent lecturers. Of course, I can't dare to give you the full lecture. I'm more journalist, sociologist, not exactly the specialist in the theology, but I'm really moved to have this chance to speak in this conference. As always, when I'm speaking about the Orthodoxy, being Orthodox Christian from the Catholic country, Roman Catholic country, so you can understand how important for me is to have the chance to present that Orthodoxy is not only phenomenon of the Eastern Slavic brothers of the Poles, but it is also present in the middle of Europe, where my Polish community lives. So we need to find that Orthodox Christianity emerged from the persecutions in the realm of Caesars and preserved the light of faith, a light dimmed in the West by barbarian invasions and the triumph of heresy. It resisted invasion of Islam despite the betrayal of the Crusaders stabbing Constantinople in the back. Thanks to Orthodoxy, Christianity became inseparably linked with Greek philosophy and Slavic vitality. 20 centuries and a quarter of one more have already accustomed us to many of the methods used by our enemies, ranging from direct violence to intrigue and false friendship to attempts of hostile takeover. Christianity persists even as its hostile environment changed, learned, and became more dangerous and insidious. But the West has changed too. Almost all that survives from the old Western Christianity is more like formal remains, serving as an aesthetic accessory to the currently dominant ideologies of liberalism and progressivism, often referred to by trendy labels as woke, transgender, the climate change, and so on. Faithful Christians in the West are once again being driven into catacombs. They are denied the right to episcopal ministry and the traditional form of the sacred liturgy. The official Roman Church, for which defeating Orthodoxy was a primary goal for many centuries, is today itself more of a tool for other powers. It lends them its time-tested methods, yet it's nothing more than another global corporation listed on Wall Street and in the City of London. Historically, the West has used uniatism and ecumenism interspersed with direct attacks such as the assault of Constantinople and the continuous campaigns waged since the 13th century against Rus, Muscovity, Serbia, Greece, the later being the site of rivalry with Islam, as tools against Orthodoxy. Union with Rome and acknowledgement of the schism superiority and the papal dominance, as well as the powers manipulating successive popes, was always on the table whenever Orthodoxy appeared weak, mortally threatened, forced into unconditional surrender to the West, as it was in Florence in 1439. In such moments, the slogan Orthodoxy or death became quite simply a profession of faith, an acknowledgement of the supremacy of faith and eternal salvation over short-term political goals. Repeating failures forced the West to change its tactics. Uniatism shifted from a tool of ad hoc blackmail into an organizational method for displacing Orthodoxy from its canonical territories. Unfortunately, also Poles were used for this purpose by Rome. A set example of this was the Union of Brest in 1596, which laid the foundations for what is known today as the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, a religious superstructure built upon the Ukrainian Nazi movement. Fortunately, attempts to extend this experiment to Russia failed. The Orthodox South Slavs, in turn, were subjected to direct aggression blessed by archbishops and popes in both 1940s and in the 1990s. When this wave of attack also failed to yield the expected results, the knives were put away and poison, or rather a biological weapon, was brought out. Ecumenism was intended to infect Orthodoxy with the viruses that have been affecting the Roman Church for decades. An ecumenical church that rejects its own exclusiveness is merely an empty shell, devoid of faith. Ecumenism amounts to rejection of the truth, simply by insisting that it cannot be the one and only, unique one. The West lost that faith long ago. It replaced it with myths, New Age, Scientology, perversions, and decadence. Those orchestrating the decline of the West would like to see Orthodox Christianity reduced to the same state of degradation. Hence, they were willing to lie, cheat, on curry favor, even falsely promising to abandon uniatism and proselytism, as it was done at Balamant in 1993. Commitments they, of course, never intended to honor. The falseness of ecumenism is all the deeper because it's not only limited merely to Christians, nor does it aim to show the path to unity to those among them who have fallen into schism and heresy. Ecumenism is a package in which a key role is played by recognition of the seniority of Judaism and the equality in truth of Islam. Hence, the rejection of this falsehood by the Orthodox faithful throughout the world was and remains justified and only choice. Since Orthodoxy could not be defeated by force, nor the faithful let themselves be hijacked in the union, neither the church transformed into the hollow shell of the Western Christianity. Hostile takeover remained the only option. Takeover in both ways, direct, given that the Anglo-Saxon intelligence agencies have exercised direct control over the Phanar since the 1960s, and more creative, through the creation of the false churches, fake form of orthodoxy as seen in Ukraine and the Baltic states. There is something more than the lack of canonical status that unites these false churches. The problem, lack of canonical status, may stem from impatience, opportunism, even nationalism, errors that could all be rectified and amended by restoring communion with the community of the faithful. Meanwhile, fake churches are hybrids of uniatism and ecumenism, disguised as orthodoxy only. Their task is not merely to push their way into Orthodox territory, as in Ukraine, but also to serve as an offensive weapon. An example of this is the incursion by Ukrainian sectarians loyal to Dumenko into the Polish Orthodox Church canonical territory. Once again, in its history, Orthodoxy has entered a time of testing, and the methods of our enemies, though familiar, are becoming brutal and ruthless once more. Internal betrayal is spreading ever wider, but paradoxically, we may find some allies among Western Christians, traditionalist circles like the Roman Catholics, alt-right supporters, traditional Anglican Communion, and the conservative evangelical Calvinist denominations. And when I call for such a cooperation, I mean the tactical alliance against anti-Christianity, including against ecumenism, ruling out even the slightest compromise related to the deposit of faith. Furthermore, we must not alienate the faithful from the regions subjected to the Western invasion, people who have often been forcibly compelled to submit the sectarians. We have to understand that prayer and the proclamation of the truth are our defense. Yet we must also remember that in our hand, we ought to hold the gun. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rikas, for your presentation. I think these global power centers are dedicated to destroy the faith, to destroy the churches, and obviously they are creating proxy churches and destroying the canonical churches. So, as we already mentioned, that is something totally inversion. They are acting like this in the many fields and speaking once and doing the other thing and probably thinking something else. Thank you very much, and many regards for Orthodox community in Poland and our Slavic brothers from Poland. Thank you. And our final speaker, it's Dmitry Belyakov from Belarus. He is the president of the Center for Systemic Legal Protection. With his presentation, we turn more directly to the geopolitical dimension of the religious question in Ukraine and Eastern Europe as well. Mr. Belyakov will examine the role of Great Britain in the religious developments in Ukraine and broader Eastern European region, placing ecclesiological processes with the context of international political interests and geopolitical competitions. His presentation is entitled "The Role of Great Britain in the Religious Questions in the Ukraine and Eastern Europe."
Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. I have the honor to present a report on the topic, the role of the United Kingdom in the religious question in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. Diplomatic and informational aspects. Since the outset of the full-scale conflict in 2022, the religious dimension of the Ukrainian crisis has acquired unprecedented geopolitical significance. The granting of the Tomos of autocephaly to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine in 2019, followed by the prohibition of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church under Law number 8371, have created a precedent that extends far beyond canonical boundaries and touches upon the very foundations of the canonical structure of world orthodoxy. Against this backdrop, the United Kingdom has consistently reinforced its diplomatic and informational presence in the religious sphere of Ukraine and Eastern Europe, suggesting a deliberate strategy implemented on multiple levels. First and foremost, institutional changes within the British foreign policy architecture merit attention. In December 2024, the government of the United Kingdom established the position of Special Envoy for Religion and Freedom of Belief, appointing Member of Parliament David Smith to this role. This appointment signals the elevation of the religious question to the status of a distinct foreign policy priority, a development previously uncharacteristic of British diplomacy. As early as 2026, we observed the active utilization of this instrument. On April 14th, the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the United Kingdom to Ukraine, Neil Crompton, held a meeting with the head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Epiphanius Dumenko, during which they discussed the processes of church seizures from the UOC in favor of the OCU, as well as the role of the church amid the war. The meeting symbolically concluded with an exchange of gifts, underscoring the informal character of the support provided. Even more indicative was the meeting of July 1, 2026, which involved not only the ambassador but also the Special Envoy David Smith, the deputy head of the FCDO's Unit for Freedom of Religion or Belief, Kajal Mavji, and other officials. During this meeting, Epiphanius Dumenko expressed his gratitude to the people and the government of the United Kingdom for their consistent support, which directly confirms the existence of a sustained high-level diplomatic dialogue. The parliamentary dimension of British engagement also warrants separate analysis. On March 11, 12, 2026, a delegation of the All-Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations held meetings in the British Parliament with Rebecca Smith, Deputy Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Christians in Parliament. The central leitmotif of these talks was the accusation that religious structures linked to the Russian Federation are complicit in military actions. At the same time, as independent observers have noted, the British parliamentarians were not informed about the seizures of UOC churches or the ill treatment of believers on territory not controlled by Russia, thereby creating a one-sided picture and distorting the actual situation regarding freedom of conscience. Informational support is conducted through leading expert platforms. As part of the same March visit, the AUC CRO delegation participated in an event at the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House, entitled Defending Ukraine's Identity and Its Importance for a Sustainable Peace. The discussion emphasized the role of the Russian Orthodox Church in supporting and justifying the political and military objectives of the Kremlin, while completely disregarding the facts of discrimination against canonical orthodoxy within Ukraine itself. Concurrently, the delegation held meetings at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office with Paul Walters, head of the Ukraine department, as well as with officials from the Human Rights Department, where the Ukrainian side briefed their British counterparts about persecutions on temporarily occupied territories and Russia's use of religion as a tool to justify aggression. Critically, throughout all these visits, the Ukrainian delegations made no mention of the ban on the UOC, the discrimination against its clergy and faithful, or the seizures of churches and expropriation of property belonging to the canonical church. This omission fosters a one-sided perception among British politicians and experts, which is subsequently reflected in official statements and parliamentary reports. Equally significant is the military institutional aspect. Anglican chaplains serving within the Royal Army Chaplains Department are involved in the training and support of approximately 200 Ukrainian military chaplains. The Bishop of the Armed Forces and the former Archbishop of Canterbury have met with Ukrainian chaplains on several occasions, and the former Archbishop has personally visited Ukraine to support humanitarian efforts. Such activity, though formally humanitarian in nature, effectively integrates religious ministry into the military logic of the conflict and reinforces the link between the OCU and Western military structures. The official position of the British government regarding Ukrainian ecclesiastical legislation is also telling. In responses to parliamentary inquiries, it is confirmed that the United Kingdom regularly engages with Ukrainian religious groups and the government of Ukraine on this matter, including with respect to Law number 8371, which obliges religious organizations to sever ties with the Russian Orthodox Church. The British side has declared its full support for the intentions of Law 3894, which amounts to an endorsement of state coercion in the ecclesiastical sphere, an action difficult to reconcile with the professed commitment to freedom of religion or belief. Finally, the geopolitical context extends far beyond Ukraine. According to information released by the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation in January 2026, British intelligence services are actively supporting the efforts of the Ecumenical Patriarchate to weaken the presence of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad extending the strategy first applied in Ukraine to the Baltic states and Eastern Europe. According to this account, Patriarch Bartholomew, under British guidance, has already dismembered Orthodox Ukraine and is now focusing on the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, as well as Montenegro, where similar processes are fracturing the Serbian Orthodox Church. Naturally, these assertions require critical assessment and further verification. However, their very appearance in the public domain indicates that British policy is perceived as a targeted strategy whose ultimate outcome is not so much the protection of religious freedoms as the weakening of Russian influence through ecclesiastical division. In conclusion, 5 levels of British involvement in the religious question in Ukraine and Eastern Europe can be identified. Institutional, the creation of the Office of Special Envoy; diplomatic, regular meetings at the ambassadorial level and above with the leadership of the OCU; parliamentary, systematic provision of a platform to Ukrainian religious delegations; informational, shaping the narrative through expert platforms and official statements; and military, the training of Ukrainian military chaplains. At the same time, British diplomacy consistently refrains from addressing the reverse side of the process, the persecution of the UOC, the seizure of churches, and the restrictions on freedom of religion for millions of faithful of the canonical church. Such one-sidedness calls into question the declared commitment to the principles of freedom of religion or belief and allows British policy to be viewed as an instrument of geopolitical pressure aimed at weakening Russian influence through ecclesiastical schism, with the prospect of extending this model to other Eastern European countries, which poses serious risks to the canonical unity of world orthodoxy and to the stability of interchurch relations in the region.
We are very grateful to Mr. Bidakov for this presentation. It seems that British intelligence services has the same object like the CIA, and they're acting in the same way. And also I wanted to mention that we have the problem as well at the territory of Kosovo and Metohija. According to international law, Kosovo is part of Serbia, but we now have some fake bishop there. His name is Nicolò Jufka, and he's saying that Serbian Orthodox churches in the Kosovo, which is the heart of Serbia, are not Serbian Orthodox churches, but Albanian Orthodox churches. So it seems that we have a lot of problems everywhere, and this is why we decided to organize this kind of conferences and openly talk about these problems. So I want to thank you all, to all our distinguished speakers for their presentations. We have approached the subject of contemporary orthodoxy from several different but closely interconnected perspectives: theological, ecclesiological, canonical, legal, historical, and geopolitical. So we will now open the discussion. I want to invite our speakers to comment, or our audience as well, on the presentation they have heard today, to respond to one another and to raise any question they consider particularly important. So please raise the hand. Mr. Sam from Canada, you have the floor. Please, we want to hear from you, and thank you very much because you join us today. It's our great pleasure.
Brothers and sisters in Christ, first I would like to start by thanking Dragana. I'm really, really amazed how she was able to collect such incredible talent, people, real Christians, call it Orthodox or whatever, but they are really, really human, intelligent, very well informed. And it's sad, the situation is sad. And I have few dates in mind. I go back to 1058 Then 1203, the sacking of Constantinople for the first time. 1453, the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire. And then after that, you go to the modern day, from attacking Serbia, splitting Kosovo, destroying all the heritage from the birth of Christ, in Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, everywhere erasing. The war is not about winning war. It's about erasing the heritage, the history. They don't want you to remember. Impossible. Impossible. So Russia was forced into it. It was like a trap. And Greece, which I'm regularly used to be in Greece, when you see the transformation of Greece, even Romania, Bulgaria, I'm not sure if they're Christian anymore. I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not sure. Their behavior, without Russia, probably Bulgaria will be Turkish today. The main cathedral in Sofia is for the sacrifices of the Russian soldiers to liberate Bulgaria. And now Bulgaria is, doing what it's doing. I don't know. I mean, I'm not optimistic. Obviously, the UK and the US, they're not human beings. I'm sorry. There are human beings and non-human beings. And through the history from if you go back to 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution was to destroy Christianity, right? And then now Ukraine is completing what they started in 1917, in my opinion. So where do we end from here? I'm not intelligent enough. I'm not optimistic. And now the takeover of the whole governments, structures, authorities by the financial and the technical elite. You have 6, 7 persons, multi-billionaires in the US that control artificial intelligence and all this industry that is brainwashing everybody that has any brain. They're trying to erase it. It's all. Where do we go from here? Honestly, I don't know. I thank you very, very, very much. It was such a delight to listen to all the speakers, and thank you, Dragana, for inviting me.
You are welcome, Mr. Sam. Thank you very much for joining us and supporting this topic. I know that it's a very important topic for you. And I want to tell that no matter that tactically maybe these global powers have the results, but strategically they will lose because we have the help of God, and at the end God will win. It's a God wish. So I think that mainly we have the problem with the political structures everywhere, not only in the Britain and the US and the Bulgaria you mentioned, and Romania and in Serbia as well, in many countries in Europe and United States and all these countries who are influenced by these Western powers. It's the same situation. We have the problem with political structures, but at the same time, everywhere you can find a lot of very good people, very honest people who understand what is happening. Of course, the big problem is propaganda. Many people don't understand what is really happening, and that is the problem. But these people who understand, they're at the right side. They're not supporting their political elites in their countries. They're on the side of God. So I don't know. I'm very optimistic and sure that at the end everything will be fine. But we will continue to speak and to organize this kind of discussions and to explain to people the suit of the problems and why the orthodoxy is under attack. So thank you very much once again, Mr. Sam. Anyone else wants to say something? Dear Olympia, do you want to say something? Oh,
I want to thank Mr. He wrote a message. Maybe he's not able to speak with us, but maybe we can read his message.
Yes, Mr. Alexios Panagopoulos, academic, he left his email address, so we will invite him to next conference for sure to be one of the speaker. We are thankful to all people who join us, and as I see, Mr. Rikas wants to say something, please.
Yes, just very shortly. I would like to especially thanks to Mr. Rodionov for this very in-depth analysis of the British influence in the processes we observe in Ukraine and wider against Orthodoxy or the actions against the Christianity. Dragana knows exactly that. Of course, I'm Polish, but I share my time between Poland and Scotland, which is unfortunately still part of the United Kingdom. So I know from my environment how the spirituality of the British state looks like, and I would say that unfortunately it's a land of diversity, promotion, and any kind of woke agenda. Not about the faith itself, So there are very serious discussions among the more traditional Anglicans if it is necessary for to become Anglican bishop or archbishop, being a really faithful Anglican, because you can doubt in God's existence. The only thing is that you have to believe in the City of London, and of course you need to support further British involvement in the World War III provoking in the East. So that's how it really supporters of this fake Ukrainian proxy church created by the Ukrainian Nazis and Ukrainian's Kiev regime look like. So they support and they act like they care about the religious freedom and about any kind of Christianity persistence in Ukraine, but they came from the absolutely nothingness of absolute vacuum, religious and spiritual vacuum, which exists in the United Kingdom, when in fact, where we know exactly the only examples of the faith which could be visible or hearable in the streets of the English cities, calls from the muezzins and the Islam prayers on the streets, because that's how the United Kingdom and especially England looks like now. So that's exactly what they mean when they say when they're saying about supporting new forms of orthodoxy. What they mean when they say about anything about ecumenism. What they mean when they declare that they want to secure religious freedom of speech, freedom of faith in the country they invade. and try to influence. So that's very important to see this, external hands interfering in the Orthodox Christian issues and affairs, and of course, which we heard many times today, it is absolutely sad and disgusting that we had to observe and admit, confirm that it's the Phanar who is, a tool in these actions against the Christianity, against the faith, against the Orthodox.
Yes, I totally agree. He's like virus in the Orthodoxy, and he's very dangerous being in this position because he's destroying from inside our religion. And yes, I will agree as well for Great Britain. Not only Great Britain, the all European countries have the similar problem because they destroy their identity, culture, and religion as well, Christianity. And now they have a lot of migrants from Muslim countries, and these migrants try to prevent their religion. And now they are spreading Islamophobia all around Europe, but they cannot understand. A lot of times I speak with the politicians from different European countries, and I try to explain that they need to understand their role in destroying Middle East, for example, and or colonizing these countries and so on. But they don't want to listen, and they don't want to discuss. They are like very surprised when they hear something like this, and it seems they don't want to understand, or really they don't understand. I don't know, but this is also the problem, because I think it's very important to all the time to be to know what you did, and to understand your role in something. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and if I can only add something, yes, exactly. We had to understand and to see that this present, new wave of externally created Islamophobia is based on the ground of Zionism and the Zionism influence in the West. So it's not some kind of primordial, something natural act of defense of Christianity, of Westernity. No, it's completely imprinted by the Zionists in the West.
Yes, I agree. It's not only about Islamophobia, it's about clash of civilization, I will say, the creating of conflicts and then managing the conflicts and having this very important role. So yes, I agree with you, Mr. Rekas. Thank you very much. And yes, Mr. Sam wants to add something, please. We cannot hear you. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
It's okay now? I forgot to mention bankrupting Greece after the financial crisis by, I call them the Antichrist EU, evil union. EU is evil union. It's not European Union, it's evil union. Bankrupting Greece by the evil union EU was the beginning of the attack on Orthodoxy in recent times. And it's all planned, one domino after another. They finished with Bulgaria, then Romania, and all of this until they arrived to Ukraine. It's all planned. It's all, Greece became the first domino to fall. When Greece falls, for me, it's the Byzantine Empire. For me, Greece is the homeland of Christianity, is Orthodoxy. When Greece falls, it becomes like a domino effect on all the others. And I lived it. I was in Europe regularly at work, vacations, but at work almost on monthly basis. All the capitals in Europe, you go to any cathedral, it became a music hall, they call it. empty churches, empty cathedrals. They dumped their religion. From my experience, what I've seen is almost 30, 40 years ago, empty churches. It's even far worse now. Even what do you call in Bucharest, Budapest, and we haven't seen anybody in churches. The only exception, you go to a Russian church. I always try to find an Orthodox church in Europe somewhere. That's where you see few people. And I love the cathedral, the Russian cathedral in Helsinki. You know, like it was beautiful. I don't know if they'll keep it. And to conclude, for me, when you ban any country from sports, religion, cultural, travel, then there is no return. For me, there is no return. They started something, they did something that you can never forgive and you can never forget. What they did to Russia, this is not absolutely unreal. I won't say unacceptable, unreal. It cannot be real. It's like a dream. How could you ban sports? How could you ban culture, music, opera singer? That's it. Sorry, I'm taking my frustration from far, but thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Sam. It's nice to hear from you. I know that you are traveling a lot and you have a lot of experience in the professional field, and it's very important to hear from you. Is there anyone else who wants to add something?
Georgios Karalis wanted to say hi.
Kalispera σε όλους. I don't speak very well English. I am sorry, but I want to thank you, Dragana, and for your word. And I hope to see at Athens for organizer another conference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karalis. For me, it's
with Orthodoxos Typos. With
Yes.
Orthodox Typos.
Yes, we will plan this, and I want to thank you very much because you join us and because you participate in the conference, for your great speech. And this is, of course, not first time. You already participate in our conferences, and I'm very delighted with your knowledge in theological fields. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we will continue to cooperate, to work together, and we will try to organize another conference in Belgrade as well, and we hope in Athens, in Vienna, in many other European countries, and maybe in United States as well.
And a Moscow.
For sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to add something? As I see, no. Dear colleagues and friends, today's discussion has demonstrated that the challenges facing contemporary Orthodoxy cannot be fully understood through a single analytic framework. Theological questions cannot be separated for the Ecclesiology and Canonical Order. At the same time, contemporary canonical disputes increasingly interact with the political and geopolitical processes, while geopolitical interests can have profound consequences for ecclesiastical relations and Orthodox unity. Our purpose today was not simply to identify disagreements, but to contribute to deeper understanding of theological, canonical, historical, legal, and geopolitical foundations. The preservation of Orthodox unity requires respect for canonical order, conciliarity, and the legitimate autonomy of local Orthodox churches. It also requires the ability to distinguish the authentic needs of the Church from political interests. They may seek to instrumentalize religious questions for geopolitical purposes. The International Council for the Defense of the Orthodox Canonical Order and the Center for Geostrategic Studies, together with our partners Theosis Editrice and Orthodoxos Typos, will continue to encourage international dialogue and cooperation among theologians, scholars, legal experts, journalists, and other specialists concerned with these questions. And we believe that today's conference represents another contribution to this broader international discussion. So I would therefore like to express my sincere gratitude to Georgios Tramboulis, Alexander Azadgan, Georgios Karalis, Olympia Fronzoni, Arno Devaley, Konrad Rikas, Nicolò Gigi, and Dmitry Bilyakov for accepting our invitation and sharing knowledge and perspectives with us. I would also like to thank all our colleagues and guests who joined us online from different countries, and particularly those who actively contributed to our discussion. I wish you all good health and every success, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to continue our cooperation at future conferences and invitations. Thank you very much.